Samuel, was it 120? And then it's chapter 2, 1 through 10. After some time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel because she said, I requested him from the Lord. Hannah prayed, my heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is lifted up by the Lord. My mouth boasts over my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. And there is no rock like our God. Do not boast so proudly or let arrogant words come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and actions are weighed by him. The bows of the warriors are broken, but the feeble are clothed with strength. Those who are full hire themselves out for food, but those who are starving hunger no more. The woman who is childless gives birth to 7, but the woman with many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and gives life. He sends some to Sheol, and he raises others up. The Lord brings poverty and gives wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the garbage pile. He seats them with noblemen and gives them a throne of honor. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. He has set the world on them. He guards the steps of his faithful ones, but the wicked perish in darkness, for a man does not prevail by his own strength. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will thunder in the heavens against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give power to his king. He will lift up the horn of his anointed.
Good morning. How many parents do I have here this morning? People that have had children. Oh, quite a few. When you had your first child, when the first child was being born, what'd you feel? Great. Fantastic. You know? When we had our first one, that was with Walter and stuff there, Sharon wasn't feeling so great. Maybe she was in labor 24 hours. So she had a C-section. But me, being the guy that passed out watching the films, was in the room while she had her C-section. And it was so quick, it was like, and it was over. And then the doctor was saying, do you want to hold your son? And you know that was as great a moment as one of the greatest moments in my life. Do you want to hold your son? This little baby, and it don't matter whether it's a boy or a girl or whatever it would have been, you know, that little child is placed in your hands. And you realize that that little child that you have been blessed with, and I consider it a blessing to have a child, has been given to you, and you see this new life right there in your hands. And they hadn't even cleaned up Boulder yet when they gave him to me, you know, and then the doctor says, well, okay, we got to clean him up and do all the good things to him and everything else, you know, and stuff there. And I consider the having a child to be a blessing. Now, back in the Old Testament times, having a child wasn't just a minor thing. It was considered a curse, as if a woman was cursed if she could not have a child. Today, maybe that's not so uncommon. It happens. Sometimes, for one reason or another, the man, the woman, a couple is not able to conceive children. But back in the Old Testament times, back in, as we look at the book of Samuel this morning, and I'm going to read you the first chapter. It was really considered a problem. First chapter of 1 Samuel. There was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zumph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrificed to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. And because the Lord had closed her womb, the rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, "Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" Once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. And she made a vow, saying, "O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, "How long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine." "Not so, my lord," Hannah replied. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." Eli answered, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." She said, "Make your servant find favor in your eyes. May your servant find favor in your eyes." Then she went to her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Early the next morning they arose and worshipped before the Lord, and then went back to their home in Ramah. Elkanah lay with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." When the man Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, "After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always." "Do what seems best to you," Elkanah, her husband, told her. "Stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his word." So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. After he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When they had slaughtered the bull, they brought the boy to Eli, and she said to him, "As surely as you live, my lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." And he worshiped the Lord there. The story of Hannah. The other week I was out at softball, and sometimes when you're coaching, different things come up. And there's a guy on the team that goes back he just started going back to Mount Hope, but he's been on the team for a couple of years. And I was talking to him, and I said, "Hey, he'd gone 4 for 4, four times up, 4 hits." And I said, Wouldn't it be nice if your wife was here to actually see you get on base? And he looked at me and he said, well, she's not here. He said, she's at home resting. And I said, well, Dylan, I said, she should be here. He said, oh, no. He said, I told you before the other year that we were trying to have a child. And I said, yeah, you told me that. He said, well, guess what? I said, what that? He said, we're not having one. I said, you're not. He said, no, we're having two. She's got twins. And I started laughing like crazy. And then he used a rather descriptive term to tell me what kind of child he was having. It's twin boys. And I said to him, I said, well, good luck. I said, that's good news. He said, well, you know, I'm the youngest of 10. So I know what it's like to have kids around and what it's like to be in a big family. So he said, I figure I'll do okay. Well, I didn't proceed to tell him that raising kids is the greatest on-the-job training that you will ever get, because there is no book on raising children. People can tell you how, they can tell you all about it, but no two children are the same. I see in the back row of this church, I have two sisters sitting back there, and they are not the same. Personality-wise, or anything. They are different. I was different than my brother. Everybody here, if you have a brother or sister, can say that. But he was truly happy because of this child. Now we see the story here of Hannah. And Hannah was married for a good long time, for a good while. And Hannah couldn't have any children. Now, in that day and age, a man didn't just have one child, one wife. He may have had one, he may have had two. In the case of Solomon, I believe they were talking about 1,000 wives and concubines and all the different things. But you think about it there, one wife couldn't have any children, the other one could. Maybe they were rivals for Elkanah's affection. And Peninnah certainly made it sound in the first chapter there that she left Hannah know that I have been blessed and I've got all these children and you've got none. Did you ever have anybody pick on you? Yeah. When I was in high school, when I was a little fella, I wasn't the tallest guy in high school, wasn't the tallest guy ever in my life. But there was one guy that used to like to pick on me a lot. A good bit taller than me. In fact, when we had wrestling class, he made sure when the gym teacher said you can choose who you want to wrestle, because he was bigger than me and fast and stronger than me, he made sure he would pick me because he knew he was going to win. We were both on the track team together, and he made sure he made some comments when we ran in the track team together about me too. In fact, he even went home to his dad and told his dad how much he enjoyed picking on me. How do I know that? Because we both went in the military. We both were sent to Korea. I was there before him. When I got out of the military and got home, he had re-upped and was still over there. And one day I saw a thing on the news and in the papers that this young man, this boy, had died in a truck accident in the military over in Korea. Now, I could have still been upset at this guy, but I went to his viewing. And as I walked through the line, I got up to his dad, and his dad shook my hand, and I introduced myself, and he says, "Oh, I remember you. My son used to come home and tell me how much he enjoyed picking on you." And the comments that he would make, and I told him to stop it. And he apologized for his son at the viewing. And I said, "It's no big deal. It's okay." I said. And the man was crying over his son, and he said, you know, he was a good boy. And I said, yes, he was. That's 40 years ago, and I remember it like today. Something about that episode made me go in within a few weeks after, and I re-upped for a year, sitting in the reserves, active duty reserves for a year to honor him. The guy who picked on me all that time. I have no reason to know why. I don't know. I just thought I should. And I served out the rest of his term. Military don't usually let you do that kind of stuff. But they did. Hannah here was picked on unmercifully by Peninnah. Every time they go up to Shiloh, she'd make sure to let her know, you know, that she had children and Hannah didn't. In verse 5, you'll see there that it says that the Lord had closed up Hannah's womb. Why do you think that was? Well, you'll know if you read the story of Samuel, you find out that Samuel was a what? He was a prophet of God. He was the one who anointed David as king. He was the one who would take over in the place of Eli when Eli passed away, because his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were both corrupt. You see, God had plans. He had plans for Hannah. The time of Hannah conceiving and having a child was according to God's will and not Hannah's. If Rick was up here, he would tell you about his son and his family, and he could tell you about the hard time that Daniel had and his wife having a child. But they have a beautiful little son. I guess you can call a handsome, beautiful, whatever you want to call Rory. But he's a good-looking little fella, and they are blessed. If my oldest son was here, he could tell you about his wife and him having some struggles, having a child, and they have a beautiful little girl named Ava. See, sometimes when things happen, they don't go the way we think they should, but God has a plan. And in this case, Hannah, it says, year after year, this went on. And it got to the point where her husband, when they would go to Shiloh, he would say, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? He knew why she was so despondent, but yet he's asking her questions. What's wrong? Why is this bothering you so much? It says there in verse 9 that she went into the temple to pray in bitterness of soul. Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. Have you ever prayed to the point where you cried? Because of what you wanted, what you needed, what you were asking God for. I mentioned Landis Tice here a lot of times when he preached here. And Landis, when he prayed, he would cry. And his cry, he would cry because it was on his heart and soul. Have you ever cried over a child? Have you ever been heartbroken to the point where it brought you to tears? Some of you may be shaking your heads this morning. Yes, men cry over their children too. And sometimes they get to that point. says Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord, and she made a vow, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life. And no razor will ever be used on his head. She prayed and she wept. And she said, God, I'll make a bargain with you. If you give me a son, I will give him back to you. I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life. What do they call somebody who no razor will ever be used upon his head? Dedicated to the Lord. Samson was one. At least up till he got his hair cut. But he was one. A Nazarite. Someone who was totally dedicated to the Lord. And she kept on praying, it says, and Hannah prayed in her heart and her lips, and Eli thought she was drunk. And he said, no, I'm just praying and pouring out my soul to God. I've been praying here out of great anguish and grief. And Eli answered, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. It says when she left there, because she had poured out her heart and soul to the Lord and cried and everything, when she left there, she was no longer despondent. But it was like a burden had been lifted off her chest. What song do we sing in church that sounds like that? How about take your burdens to the Lord and leave them there? Have you ever done that? Have you ever gotten to the point in your life where you got something weighing heavy on you and nothing seems to take that burden away? Nothing. Nothing helps. And the only thing that will help is when we finally realize that only God can solve whatever the problem is. And God is the one who can take that burden away, place it in His hands, and allow Him to work. And I truly believe in the life of Hannah that the reason she didn't have children and the reason that she got to this point is God had a plan for her. And He was waiting until the time that Hannah got to the point where she was willing to be a servant of God and He could use her, and she was willing to give her child to the Lord to be used. He had a plan. Do you know that once Hannah would have Samuel, that would not be her only child? If you look at chapter 2, it tells you that Hannah would have 3 more sons and 2 daughters. That because of what she was willing to do and because of her willingness to give it Samuel to the Lord, that she would be blessed with more children. Now, I'm not going to stand here today and tell you that when the time would come that this child would be ready to be handed over to Eli, that she walked in the door and she says, here he is, he's yours, and walked back out. The Bible tells us that every year, when they would make the trip up to Shiloh, during the course of the year, she had made him a new coat and other things and would take him up to Samuel. He wasn't forgotten. I always think the first child in the family is special. Connie, don't say a word.
What kind of special? Is extra help special?
Parents look on that first child in a different way than they do all the others. That first one is just, there's something different when you have that first child. Don't get me wrong. We love all our boys. Love the grandchildren too. Never figured I would get to the point where I would be saying I was grandpa. I don't know. Maybe we all do. And maybe in some cases there'll be a time down the road where somebody will call you great-grandpa or great-grandma. But I enjoy all of the grandchildren too. It tells us in verse 21 that when they went up to Shiloh again after having the child, in verse 20 it says, so in the course of time Hannah conceived, as I read, that she didn't go with. She didn't go with because she said she wasn't going until the boy was weaned and he was ready to be turned over to Eli. And when they went up there, when she finally got to that point in verse 25, it says, she said to him, as surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked for. I wonder if that was an awful tough trip that she made up to there to the temple. Do you think so? Do you think it was hard to follow through? Have you ever made a promise to somebody and when it was all said and done, maybe you wished you hadn't? Had you ever told somebody, yeah, I'll do that? And when the time came, you're going, why in the world did I say that? I don't read that here in the Bible, though. I don't read that about Hannah, that it was a tough trip going up, that she thought this was the worst thing in the world, that she made this deal. As surely as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord, and I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord for his whole life. He will be given over to the Lord. Maybe Eli forgot. How many people, times do you think people probably came to the temple asking God for things? And maybe Eli was there and gave them an encouraging word and maybe sent them on their way. They left in good spirits. After a while, he maybe remembered for a while, and maybe after a couple of years, because it would have been a couple of years between the time that she would have had the child and the child was going up there. Samuel was going up. Eli might have forgotten all about that conversation. If she'd have kept Samuel at home, Eli might not ever have thought about it. But she reminded Eli, remember me? Remember, I'm the one that said if God would only give me a son, I would give him to the Lord. It says, and he worshiped the Lord there. Now we come to the major part of our lesson. Because I want you to remember something here. When Hannah prayed, and when she cried and she wept, what did it show? Faith? Believing that God could provide what she needed. That only God could deliver it. In 1 John chapter 5, verses 14 and 15, it says, and this is the confidence that we have towards him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know He hears us in whatever we ask, we know we have the requests that we asked of Him. That means we know God can do it. We know He will give it to us if it's within His will. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, it says, "Ask, and it will be given you." I've had people already say about different things, and I look at them and I say, well, you know, if only you'd asked, I could have helped. If only you asked. God knows our heart's desire. But He wants us to get to the point where we're willing to ask, to pray. And not just once. Not just once. When you were a kid and your mom and dad, you wanted something from your mom and dad, how many times did you ask? Did you ever get to the point where your mom and dad might have said, you're annoying now? Quit asking. You persisted. You kept it up. If you can do that with something you want from mom and dad when you were little, why can't you do it when you pray? Why can't we do it in our adult lifehood when there's something that we're praying about? We need to be persistent. And I'm not saying, once, twice, 3 times. There are people that have been praying for other individuals to be saved and whatever the physical problems they may have or other things for years. And they continue to pray. The Bible says to pray without what? Ceasing. Don't stop. Don't ask once. Don't ask twice. Keep praying. When she finally gets up to Shiloh and she turns him over, the Bible tells us that then, if we look at chapter 2 there, it's what they call Hannah's prayer, her song. If you look in the Bible in Luke chapter 1, verses 67 through 80, you will see Zacharias had the same type of thing, a song of praise to God, about John the Baptist. If you look in Luke chapter 1 and you look in, I think it's verses 46 to 55, you will see that Mary had a song of praise about Jesus. I'll give you John the Baptist. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because He has come to His people and redeemed them. He has raised us up a horn of salvation for us in the house of His servant David, as He said through His holy prophets of long ago, salvation from our enemy and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our ancestors and to remember His holy covenant. The oath He swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies, and to enable us to serve Him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before Him all our days. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, for you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for Him, to give His people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace. Zacharias was praising the Lord because this little child that God had given him and his wife Elizabeth was destined for great things as the forerunner of Jesus Christ. To go on before, prophesying about Him, to preach the gospel of salvation. Zacharias' song and praise there was because of how God had blessed his family. You can think of Mary there and her song of praise about how God had blessed her, of being the mother of Jesus Christ. We think here of Hannah and now and her and the praise that she has here in chapter 2. And it says, then Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord. In the Lord of my home is my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over mine enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. She wasn't despondent anymore, was she? It says, my mouth rejoices in the Lord. She sang his praises because this little child had been born and God had fulfilled his promise to her, and she fulfilled her promise to God. And she's telling everybody about how what the Lord had done for her. But the last part of it says, my mouth boasts over my enemies. Guess what? Peninnah could no longer put her down because she was childless. Peninnah no longer was lifted up over top of her. Was Hannah alone in this type of situation? Think of Abraham's wife, Sarai. And what she went through. She was 90 years old when she finally had a child. Now, I'm not going to be dumb enough to ask which 90-year-old woman wants to have a child. Or even 80 or 70 or 60. But God blessed them with a child. Rachel was married for 20 years before she had twins. Jacob's wife couldn't have any children either until the last two. And who were they? Oh, this is your quiz for this morning. Joseph, and what was his younger brother? Benjamin. Yeah, excellent. Those were the only two that came from Rebekah. The only two. Do you think that's why the boys might have been jealous of Joseph? Sure. She delights in her deliverance from this situation. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. We sing our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above. But there was a song that we sang back at Camp Eaton many times, a shelter in a time of storm. The Lord our rock, in him we hide, a shelter in the time of storm. Secure whatever bill betide, a shelter in the time of storm. O rock divine, O refuge dear, a shelter in the time of storm. Be thou our helper ever near, a shelter in the time of storm. And then the chorus says, O Jesus is a rock in a weary land. A weary land, a weary land. Do you think Hannah might have felt that way? Worn out, beaten down, despondent, and she puts it in God's hands, and he was her rock. This morning I'm telling you that we're no different. We're no different. He is our rock. He is our fortress. He is the same God today he was back then. We can put it in his hand, whatever the problem may be. Whatever the situation. There is no rock like our God. To Peninnah in verse 3, she says, do not keep talking so proudly or let your mouth speak such arrogance. For the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds are weighed. Don't keep putting me down. Don't talk so proudly now. I got a boy too. Yeah. She was free from that burden. The bows of the warriors are broken. For those who stumbled are armed with strength. Those who were full hired themselves out for food, but those who were hunger no more. You know, circumstances can change, can't they? How many people here know the rich can become poor and the poor can become rich? Oh, sure. The big, strong guy, he can become weak. And the weak can become strong. Those who were hungry, hunger no more. She who was barren has borne 7 children. Now, that's just a phrase because of the Bible. The Bible using that as a given number, but she had 5 children. It tells us in chapter 2, then later on. Amazing, isn't it? How God can turn the tide around. How he can change things in our life if we're willing to submit to him. Now, some of you are probably sitting there right now, Walt, the last time Dave wasn't here and you were teaching, you were out of here by 11:15. Well, not this morning. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He is in charge of life. He gives life, he takes it away. We have the story of Lazarus who was dead for days, and God brought him back to life. In fact, the people said, he stinks. You can't bring him back to life, but God did. Jesus did. The miracle of life is something else. I talk about that cat of ours, and I can honestly say Thomas wanted a kitten. Sharon didn't want a kitten. Not another one. I was kind of stuck in the middle. Thomas won out. But when we got that thing was what? About this big. This little bitty kitten. And it came to the house. And we're looking at this little kitten, and you get yourself a bowl, and you try to get some food and a little bit of water, and you want to make sure it's all taken care of. And everybody wanted to hold the little kitten. Well, that kitten ain't so little no more. Grows up just like our children do. You know that? But now every morning when I get up in the morning, that cat comes to the hallway, and I'm not the one that really wanted the cat either. But it lays down in the hallway and sprawls out and wants me to rub its belly and everything else and stuff there on the floor before I can even go get a shower or anything. And it lays there and it puts its head on my foot and starts rubbing its head and doing all kinds of things. So for a little bit I'll play with it. I get done with the shower and go get dressed and have my socks on. Do you know as I'm putting on my socks, it comes back for a second round? And if it's up on the windowsill or something, that cat comes running back down. Now don't tell the cat, but I have fun playing with it. You know, I love all my boys, and I loved them when they were little, love them when they were big. They don't leave my house, as I've told you as many times, without me saying I love you. They don't get off the phone without me telling them I love them. You know why? Because I never know if it's the last time I have a chance to tell them I love them. Do you know what? Hannah sings her songs of praise here to God. And as you go down through these scriptures, do you know what? She's praising the Lord. Because she don't know if this is maybe the last time she'll get a chance to praise God either. Oh, how I love Jesus because he first loved me. Do you tell God that you love him? Do you tell him every day? Do you end your prayers with, Lord, I love you for what all you've done for me? I think many times of what my parents did for me, did for all of us. And how I'm going to love them and how they loved us. And my dad's sitting here, and he can probably think back over his family and say the same thing about his parents. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles, he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash. He seats them with prince and has them inherit a throne of honor, for the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. Upon them he has set the world. Many times people have stood up here and said, when you were little, whose hand did you go looking for? Your mom's, your dad's. Why? Because they were your rock, weren't they? They were the ones you trusted in. They were the ones you put your faith in. When I was little, Mom and Dad could handle any problem. Little did I know that they were asking the Lord for strength to handle the same problem, to handle the children and raise them right. God can handle any problem if we're only willing to go to Him. Let's bow our heads in prayer this morning. Dear Lord, in this morning's hour, we are thankful for this time of fellowship which we have had together. We ask your blessings upon each and every one of us as we depart this morning. We ask, dear Lord, that we might realize and put our faith and trust in you, that no matter what circumstances come up in our life, that you are our rock. You are there that we can take our prayers and our petitions and our wants to, that we can take our burdens to, dear Lord, and lay them at your feet and leave them there, because we know that you are a prayer hearing and a prayer answering God. Bless us this morning, and may we be a blessing to you. Amen.